The wind screamed across the Wyoming plateau like something wounded and furious. 40-mile-per-hour gusts turned falling snow into horizontal needles that stung exposed skin and reduced visibility to mere feet. The temperature had plummeted to 32 degrees below zero, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. Somewhere in that white chaos, a silver SUV sat half-buried in a snowdrift, its hazard lights blinking uselessly against the overwhelming darkness of the blizzard. The engine had died 20 minutes ago, and with it, the heat. Inside, Avery Collins pressed her palms against the frosted window, her breath forming small clouds that immediately crystallized on the glass. Her fingers had stopped trembling 5 minutes ago, which terrified her more than the shaking had. She knew what that meant. Hypothermia was setting in. She glanced down at her left leg, at the prosthetic that had been her companion for 3 years now. The battery-powered heating element had failed when the car lost power, and she could no longer feel where the socket met her residual limb. The prosthetic itself had cracked during her attempt to push the car free, the cold making the carbon fiber brittle and unforgiving. Her phone showed no signal. Of course it did not. She was 60 miles from the nearest town, on a mountain road that had been closed for exactly this reason. But she had taken it anyway, because the court date could not wait, because Jenna's family deserved answers, because she had promised. Now that promise might cost her everything. Avery pushed open the car door, fighting against the wind that tried to slam it shut. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. She stumbled out, one good leg and one broken prosthetic, and immediately sank knee-deep in snow. She had to find higher ground, had to find a signal, had to tell someone where she was, before the cold finished what the accident had started. Each step was agony. The damaged prosthetic dragged uselessly, forcing her to hop and crawl through drifts that seemed determined to swallow her whole. Snow found its way into her collar, down her back, into her gloves. The red wool gloves that Jenna had given her the Christmas before the avalanche. 50 feet from the car, her strength gave out. Avery collapsed face first into the snow, her body finally surrendering to the cold and exhaustion. She tried to push herself up, but her arms would not cooperate. The white world around her began to blur at the edges, darkness creeping in from her peripheral vision. So this is how it ends, she thought. Not in an avalanche like Jenna, in a blizzard. Alone. Her last conscious act was to reach out her hand, fingers splayed against the snow as if grasping for something that was not there. The red glove slipped from her numb fingers and tumbled away, a spot of crimson against the endless white. Then there was nothing but cold and darkness. 8 miles away, Noah Pierce gripped the handlebars of his snowmobile and squinted into the storm. The visibility was near zero, but he had driven this route so many times that his hands knew the way even when his eyes could not see it. Beside him, Ghost sat alert in the specially designed sidecar, ears flat against the wind, but nose working overtime. Noah was 42 years old, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved by difficult years and harsh weather. Silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples, and his jaw carried a perpetual shadow of stubble. His eyes were the gray-blue of winter ice, and they held the same distant quality, as if part of him was always somewhere else, somewhere colder. He had been running winter rescue patrols in Wyoming for 3 years now, ever since he had walked away from everything else. The job was dangerous, solitary, and thankless, which suited him perfectly. He did not want thanks. He did not deserve it. Ghost whined suddenly, a sharp sound that cut through the howling wind. Noah immediately throttled down, his senses sharpening. In 7 years together, through missions that still haunted his dreams, and a life that had become more about survival than living, he had learned to trust Ghost's instincts more than his own. The Belgian Malinois stood up in the sidecar, nose pointed northeast, body rigid with attention. A scar ran along his left shoulder, a memento from a night in the Arctic that Noah tried not to think about. Ghost had taken that wound protecting Noah, just as he had protected him 100 times before and since. Noah killed the engine, and in the relative silence, he heard nothing but wind. But Ghost's behavior was unmistakable. The canine's trained alert posture, the specific whine that meant only one thing: human, alive, distressed. Noah pulled out his thermal binoculars, but they were useless in this weather. He would have to trust Ghost. He restarted the snowmobile and let Ghost guide him, following the direction of the dog's intent gaze. They pushed through the storm for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The world reduced to a tunnel of white noise and stinging ice. Then Ghost barked, sharp and urgent. Noah saw the hand first. Fingers splayed against the snow, utterly still. Then the arm, the shoulder, the body of a woman lying face down in a drift. His heart hammered against his ribs as he leaped from the snowmobile, years of training taking over even as his mind raced through worst-case scenarios. He dropped to his knees beside her, brushing snow from her face with practiced care. She was young, maybe 30, with auburn hair that was rapidly being buried by fresh snowfall. Her skin was pale, lips tinged blue. But when he pressed his fingers to her throat, he found what he was looking for. A pulse. Weak and thready, but there. Ghost had followed him, and now the dog did something that stopped Noah cold. Instead of maintaining the professional distance that had been trained into him, Ghost lowered his head and began licking the woman's face, whining softly. It was the kind of behavior Ghost reserved for Noah alone. In 7 years, Noah had never seen him do this with a stranger. Noah did not have time to puzzle over it. He stripped off his tactical jacket and wrapped it around her, then lifted her in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, which worried him. As he carried her to the snowmobile, he noticed 2 things. 1, she was missing her left leg from just below the knee, a damaged prosthetic still attached to the residual limb. 2, a red glove lay in the snow a few feet away, already half buried. He grabbed the glove, stuffed it in his pocket, and secured her in the sidecar. Ghost immediately curled around her, sharing body heat in a way that seemed almost protective. Noah mounted the snowmobile, his mind already calculating distance, time, and temperature. The nearest shelter was 8 miles east. An emergency rescue station, currently unmanned but stocked with supplies. In this weather, it would take at least 30 minutes to reach. She might not have 30 minutes. He pushed the throttle forward and leaned into the storm. Halfway there, she stirred. Noah felt her movement before he heard her voice, a sudden tension in the way Ghost shifted in the sidecar. He glanced back to see her eyes fluttering open, panic immediately flooding her features as she registered the unfamiliar surroundings. The strange man. The dog pressed against her side. She tried to sit up, tried to pull away, but her body would not cooperate. Her movements were clumsy, uncoordinated, the hypothermia stealing her control. Noah slowed the snowmobile, but did not stop. Stopping meant dying, for both of them. She tried to speak, but only a cracked whisper emerged. Her eyes darted from Noah to Ghost to the white wilderness around them, terror and confusion warring on her face. Noah kept his voice calm, pitched to cut through the wind without shouting. He had used this tone in a dozen combat zones, talking down frightened civilians and wounded soldiers alike. It was the voice of someone who expected to be obeyed, because disobedience meant death. "Ride with me," he said. Just those 3 words. Not a question. Not a command. Something in between. She stared at him, this stranger who had appeared from nowhere in the middle of a blizzard. Her lips moved, trying to form words that would not come. But Ghost pressed closer to her, that scarred head resting on her leg, those brown eyes looking up at her with something that might have been reassurance. And perhaps it was the cold stealing her ability to fight, or perhaps it was the dog's inexplicable trust, or perhaps it was simply the recognition that she had no other choice. But Avery Collins stopped struggling. Her eyes met Noah's, held them for a long moment, and then she nodded. It was the smallest movement. It was everything. Noah turned back to the storm and drove. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us where you are watching from tonight. And stay with us, because what happens next will test everything these 2 survivors thought they knew about strength, trust, and what it means to save a life. The emergency station appeared through the snow like a mirage, a squat wooden structure that seemed impossibly solid against the chaos of the storm. Noah pulled the snowmobile under the minimal shelter of an overhang and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost painful, broken only by the wind and Ghost's soft whining. Noah carried Avery inside, Ghost running ahead to scout the dark interior. The station had not been used in months, but it was well maintained, stocked with emergency supplies and equipped with a wood-burning stove. Noah laid Avery on a cot near the fireplace and immediately set to work building a fire. Within minutes, the first flames began to lick at the dry kindling. Within 10, the room had started to warm, the orange glow pushing back against the gray darkness that seeped through the frost-covered windows. Ghost had positioned himself by the door, ears alert for any sound from outside. But his eyes kept drifting back to the woman on the cot, watching her with an intensity that Noah found unsettling. In all their years together, he had never seen Ghost attach himself to anyone else. The dog tolerated other people at best, ignored them at worst. This was something different. Avery was shivering now, which was actually a good sign. It meant her body was still fighting, still trying to warm itself. Her eyes were open, tracking Noah's movements as he gathered blankets and checked the station's supplies. When he finally sat down across from her, close enough to monitor her condition but far enough to give her space, she spoke for the first time. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice raw and broken. "Where are you taking me?" "Noah Pierce," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Search and rescue. Taking you somewhere you will not freeze to death." She tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. He watched her take stock of her situation, her eyes moving from the damaged prosthetic to the unfamiliar room to the strange man and his dog. He could see her mind working, trying to piece together how she had gotten from her car to here. "My car," she said, "half buried about 8 miles west. You will not be getting it out until spring." She processed this, her jaw tightening. "I need to get to Cheyenne. There is a court date. Not happening. All roads are closed. Storm is not letting up for at least 2 days." He watched the news hit her, watched her face cycle through denial, anger, and finally something that looked like defeat. But underneath it all, he saw something else. A stubbornness that refused to be extinguished, even now. Ghost rose from his post by the door and padded over to the cot. Without hesitation, he jumped up and lay down beside her, pressing his warm body against her side. Avery flinched at the movement, but when the dog simply settled in, offering heat and comfort without asking anything in return, she slowly relaxed. Noah watched this with narrowed eyes. "Ghost," he said quietly. The dog's ears twitched at his name, but he did not move. "He does not usually do that with strangers," Noah said, almost to himself. Avery's hand moved tentatively, hovering over Ghost's head before finally settling on his fur. The dog's eyes closed in contentment. "Maybe he does not think I am a stranger," she murmured. Something shifted in Noah's chest at those words, something he had spent 3 years trying to bury. He pushed it down, focusing instead on the practical matters at hand. He retrieved the first aid kit from the station's supplies and knelt beside the cot. "Your prosthetic is damaged. I need to see how bad." Avery tensed, that stubbornness flaring in her eyes. "I can manage. You cannot walk. You cannot stand. You cannot manage anything until we figure out what we are working with." He held her gaze, his voice firm but not unkind. "I have seen worse. Trust me." A long moment passed. Then, slowly, she nodded. Noah examined the prosthetic with careful hands. The socket was cracked, the carbon fiber shell damaged in multiple places. The battery-powered heating element was dead, and even if it were not, the structural integrity was compromised beyond field repair. "When did you lose it?" he asked, keeping his tone clinical. 3 years ago. Avalanche." His hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their examination. He knew something about avalanches, about the things they took from you that could never be replaced. He wrapped her residual limb in clean bandages and thermal padding, then covered her with every blanket he could find. The fire was burning strong now, filling the small station with warmth and the comforting smell of wood smoke. "There is soup in the supplies," he said, standing. "You need to eat. Get your core temperature up." He busied himself with the camp stove, heating a can of vegetable soup while Avery watched from the cot. Ghost remained pressed against her side, a furry furnace that showed no signs of moving. "What is his name?" she asked. "Ghost, because he is pale, because he moves like one, and because he is the only survivor from a mission that left 3 men dead." The words came out before Noah could stop them. He froze, his back to her, cursing himself for the slip. He had not talked about that night in 3 years, had not even acknowledged it to anyone except Ghost, in the dark hours when the nightmares came. But something about this woman, this stranger who his dog had chosen for reasons Noah could not understand, made the walls he had built feel less solid. Avery did not push, did not ask the obvious questions. Instead, she simply said, "He is beautiful." Noah exhaled slowly. "He is the best soldier I have ever known." He brought her the soup, and she ate in small, careful sips, her hands still trembling from the cold. Ghost watched each spoonful with interest, but did not beg. He was not that kind of dog. When she finished, Noah took the empty container and sat back down across from her. Outside, the wind continued its assault on the station walls, but in here, in this small circle of warmth, the storm seemed very far away. "You should sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we will figure out the next steps." Avery's eyes were already growing heavy, the warmth and exhaustion finally catching up with her. But before she surrendered to sleep, she asked one more question. "Why," she murmured, "why did you come out in this? You could have died." Noah considered the question. There were a dozen answers he could give, all of them true, none of them complete. "Because Ghost found you," he finally said, "and he is never wrong about people." Avery's eyes drifted closed, her hand still resting on Ghost's fur. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out. her body finally giving in to the rest it desperately needed. Noah did not sleep. He sat by the fire, feeding it through the night, watching the flames dance and listening to the storm rage outside. Ghost remained with the woman, a living guardian against the cold, and somewhere in the back of Noah's mind, a voice he had spent 3 years trying to silence whispered something he was not ready to hear. Maybe you did not come out here to die. Maybe you came out here to find a reason to live. He pushed the thought away and focused on the fire. But it lingered, stubborn as the snow, refusing to be buried. If you are still with us, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is just beginning, and you will not want to miss what happens when the sun finally rises. The night stretched on, measured not in hours but in the rhythm of the storm and the steady crackle of the fire. Noah kept watch as he had done countless times before, in places far more dangerous than this, against enemies far more deadly than the cold. But those vigils had been filled with purpose, with mission parameters and extraction points. This was something different. This was simply waiting for morning in a world that had become very small, reduced to one room, one fire, one woman, and one dog. Around what his internal clock told him was 2 in the morning, Avery began to dream. Noah noticed the change immediately. The way her breathing shifted from the deep rhythm of exhaustion to something more ragged. Her hands twitched against Ghost's fur, fingers clenching as if trying to hold on to something. Her face, relaxed in sleep just moments before, twisted into an expression of terror. Ghost lifted his head, whining softly. The dog looked at Noah, then back at Avery, uncertain how to help. Noah had seen enough trauma, both in others and in the mirror, to recognize what was happening. He moved quietly to the cot, crouching down so he would be at her eye level when she woke. He did not touch her. You did not touch people in the grip of nightmares, not unless you wanted to become part of whatever horror they were reliving. Avery's breathing grew more rapid. Words began to slip from her lips, broken and desperate. "No, Jenna, hold on. I have got you. Do not let go. Do not let go." Ghost pressed closer, his warm body a grounding presence. And slowly, gradually, Avery's breathing began to steady, her hands unclenched. The nightmare loosened its grip. When her eyes finally opened, they were wide and wet, the fire's light reflected in unshed tears. For a moment, she did not seem to know where she was. Her gaze darted around the unfamiliar room, panic rising. Then she saw Ghost, saw Noah crouching beside her, close but not touching, his expression carefully neutral. "You are safe," he said quietly. "Emergency station. Wyoming. Remember?" Avery blinked, reality reasserting itself. Her hand found Ghost's fur, gripping it like an anchor. The dog did not flinch. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not mean to." "Do not apologize." Noah's voice was gruff, but not unkind. "I know what nightmares look like." She studied his face then, really looked at him for the first time since he had pulled her from the snow. And whatever she saw there made her ask a question she probably would not have asked in the daylight. "You said Ghost is the only survivor. What happened?" Noah was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. The wind howled. Ghost watched both of them with ancient, knowing eyes. "Maybe someday," Noah finally said. "Not tonight." Avery accepted this without argument. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that some stories could only be told in pieces, that some wounds needed time before they could bear the weight of words. But she offered something in return, something that surprised them both. Her name was Jenna, she said softly. My best friend since we were 8 years old. We were mountain guides together. I was the lead on the tour that day. I chose the route. She paused, her throat working. Ghost licked her hand, a gesture of comfort that seemed almost human. The avalanche came so fast. We tried to run. I pushed her toward a rock outcropping, thought it might give us shelter. But the snow, it was like being inside a washing machine. When it finally stopped, I was buried up to my chest. My leg was crushed under a boulder. And Jenna? She could not finish. She did not need to. Noah thought of Davis, Chen, Rodriguez, 3 names that lived in his chest like shrapnel, 3 faces that visited him every night. You carry ghosts, he said. Avery met his eyes. So do you. It was not a question, and Noah did not deny it. They sat in silence after that, but it was different from the silence before. This was the quiet of 2 people who had recognized something in each other. Not romance, not attraction, not anything so simple. Just the acknowledgement that they were both walking wounded, both survivors of disasters that should have killed them, both trying to figure out why they were still breathing when people they loved were not. Ghost lay between them, a bridge connecting 2 broken souls. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside, something had shifted. Something small and fragile and utterly unexpected. Something that felt almost like hope. Dawn arrived not as a sunrise, but as a gradual lightening of the gray, the storm's fury undiminished, but somehow less absolute in the pale morning light. Noah had not slept. He sat by the window, watching the snow pile higher against the glass, calculating distances and temperatures and odds that grew worse with every passing hour. Ghost had finally left Avery's side around 5 in the morning, padding over to sit beside Noah with the quiet understanding of a creature who had shared too many difficult nights with his partner. The dog pressed his shoulder against Noah's leg, offering the same wordless comfort he had given for 7 years. Avery stirred on the cot, and Noah turned to watch her wake. The process was slow, her body still recovering from the hypothermia, her mind struggling to accept the reality of her situation. When her eyes finally opened, they found Noah immediately, as if she had known exactly where he would be. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been the night before. "About 6 hours. Storm is still going strong." She pushed herself up to a sitting position, wincing at muscles that had stiffened overnight. Ghost trotted over to her, tail wagging, and she scratched behind his ears with a familiarity that seemed to have developed overnight. Noah brought her water and a protein bar from the emergency supplies. She ate mechanically, her eyes distant, her mind clearly somewhere else. "The court date," she said finally. "It was supposed to be tomorrow." Noah did not sugarcoat it. "You are not making it. Roads are closed for at least 48 hours, probably longer." He watched the news hit her, watched her face cycle through the stages of grief in fast forward. Denial, anger, bargaining, all compressed into a few seconds before settling into something that looked like resignation but carried an undercurrent of steel. There has to be another way. A helicopter? A snowplow? Something. There is nothing. Not in this weather. Avery's hands clenched around the water bottle. "You do not understand. This case has been delayed 3 times already. If I do not testify, they might dismiss it entirely. Jenna's family has been waiting 3 years for answers. 3 years." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Noah saw the weight she had been carrying. Not just the physical burden of her disability, but the crushing responsibility of being the only witness who could speak for the dead. He thought of Davis, Chen, Rodriguez, thought of the families he had never been able to face, the letters he had never been able to write, the answers he had never been able to give. "Tell me about the case," he said. Avery looked up, surprised by the question. Most people did not want to hear about lawsuits and legal proceedings. Most people changed the subject as quickly as possible. But Noah was not most people. And somehow, in this small cabin surrounded by a storm that wanted to kill them both, the normal rules did not apply. "The tour company," she began slowly, "they cut corners on safety equipment. The avalanche transceivers we were using were outdated. The batteries half dead. When the slide hit, my beacon worked. Jenna's did not." She paused, her jaw tightening. "The rescue team found me in 4 hours. They found Jenna's body in 16. If her beacon had been working..." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Noah understood survival math. He had done the calculations himself in the aftermath of the Arctic mission. If he had turned left instead of right, if he had waited 30 seconds longer, if he had trusted his gut instead of the faulty intel. "The company denied everything," Avery continued, "said we ignored safety protocols, said it was our fault. They have lawyers, money, connections. All I have is my testimony and the maintenance records I managed to save." She looked at Noah, and in her eyes he saw something he recognized. The same desperate need to make meaning out of meaningless tragedy. The same burning desire to ensure that the people they had lost had not died for nothing. "I promised her family," Avery whispered. "I promised them I would see this through." Ghost whined softly and pressed his head against her leg. Noah watched his dog offer comfort to this woman he had known for less than a day, and felt something shift in his chest. "The storm will pass," he said, "and when it does, we will find a way to get you to that courthouse." Avery stared at him. "Why do you care? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Noah considered the question. He thought about the 3 years he had spent running from his past, hiding in the mountains, using the dangerous work of rescue patrol as a slow form of suicide. He thought about the nights spent alone in his cabin, Ghost, his only companion. The faces of the dead, his only visitors. He thought about the way Ghost had found this woman in the snow. The way the dog had attached himself to her as if he had been waiting for her all along. "Maybe I am tired of watching people give up," he said finally. "Maybe I am tired of giving up myself." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to explore. But something had been said. Some truth had been acknowledged. And there was no taking it back. The morning passed slowly. Noah checked their supplies, calculated how long they could last if the storm continued, mapped out potential routes to the main rescue station 5 miles east. Avery did what she could from the cot, organizing the medical supplies, inventorying the food, keeping her hands busy while her mind raced. Ghost moved between them, a furry shuttle diplomacy, checking on one and then the other. His presence seemed to ease the awkwardness that might otherwise have developed between two strangers trapped together by circumstance. Around noon, the radio crackled to life. Noah grabbed it immediately, his heart hammering. This was the first communication they had received since the storm began. "Emergency Station 7. This is Base. Do you copy?" Noah keyed the mic. "Base, this is Pierce at Station 7. I copy." "Pierce, we have been trying to reach you for 6 hours. What is your status?" Noah gave a quick situation report. 1 rescued civilian, hypothermia survivor. Mobility impaired. Adequate supplies for 72 hours. Station intact. Requesting update on storm timeline. There was a long pause before the response came. Pierce, the storm is worse than predicted. We are looking at another 48 to 72 hours before we can attempt extraction. Can you hold out that long? Noah looked at Avery, saw the hope draining from her face as she listened to the conversation. 48 to 72 hours. Her court date would come and go. Jenna's family would be left without answers. Affirmative, he said into the radio. We will hold. One more thing, Pierce. We have another situation. Ranger Mark Holloway went missing yesterday during a search operation. Last known position was about 3 miles from your location. If you see any sign of him... Understood. Pierce out. He set down the radio and met Avery's eyes. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The mathematics of grief were simple. Every hour they were stuck here was another hour the company's lawyers had to delay, to dismiss, to bury the truth under legal procedure. Noah opened his mouth to say something, though he did not know what, when Ghost suddenly stood rigid. The dog's ears pricked forward, his nose working, his entire body oriented toward the door. Someone was out there. Noah moved without thinking, years of training taking over. He positioned himself between Avery and the door, one hand reaching for the emergency flare he had been using as a makeshift weapon. Ghost stood at his side, teeth bared, a low growl building in his throat. The door burst open in a swirl of snow and wind, and a figure stumbled through. A man in a ranger's uniform, face bloody, shoulder hanging at an unnatural angle. Mark Holloway had found them. Noah caught him before he hit the floor, dragging him to the second cot while Avery threw off her blankets and tried to stand. She collapsed immediately, her damaged prosthetic unable to support her weight, but she crawled toward the medical supplies without hesitation. Ghost circled the newcomer, sniffing, assessing. The dog did not growl, but he did not relax either. Uncertain. Holloway's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Noah with difficulty. "Pierce," he rasped. "Noah Pierce." Noah froze. "How do you know my name?" "I know who you are." The ranger's laugh was bitter, wet. "Everyone in search and rescue knows who you are. The great Noah Pierce, hero of a dozen missions, leader of Operation Arctic Silence." The words hit Noah like bullets. He had not heard that mission name spoken aloud in 3 years, had buried it so deep he had almost convinced himself it had never happened. But Holloway was not finished. 3 men dead, he continued, his voice gaining strength from some dark well of energy. Davis, Chen, Rodriguez, all because their commander made the wrong call. Noah's hands had stopped moving. The blood from Holloway's head wound dripped steadily onto the floor, but he could not make himself continue the first aid. Could not move. Could not breathe. Avery had reached the medical supplies. She looked between Noah and Holloway, confusion and concern warring on her face. "Noah," she said. "Noah, he needs help." But Noah was somewhere else. He was back in the Arctic, the wind howling around them, the enemy closing in, the choice that would haunt him forever hanging in the frozen air. "Which way?" Davis had asked. "Which way do we go?" And Noah had chosen. He had looked at the map, calculated the odds, and chosen wrong. Noah. Avery's voice cut through the memory. She had crawled to his side, was gripping his arm with surprising strength. Her eyes were fierce, determined. "Whatever happened then," she said, "this is now. This man needs help. I need you here. Ghost needs you here. Ghost whined, pressing against Noah's leg. The familiar weight, the familiar warmth, anchored him to the present. He drew a shaking breath, then another. His hands began to move again, automatic, efficient, binding Holloway's wounds with the same clinical precision he had used on 100 battlefields. Holloway watched him work, something like respect flickering in his pain-glazed eyes. The report said, "You froze," he said quietly. "After the mission. Said you could not function. Said you were a liability." Noah did not respond. He finished securing the shoulder sling and sat back on his heels. "The report was wrong," Holloway continued. "I can see that now. A man who froze could not have done what you just did. You do not know anything about me. I know you saved my life. And hers." Holloway nodded toward Avery. "That is enough." The tension in the room slowly dissipated. Ghost's posture relaxed, his tail giving a tentative wag. Avery released her grip on Noah's arm, but stayed close, a silent offer of support. Night fell again, the second night of the storm. 3 people now in the small station, plus 1 dog who seemed determined to watch over all of them. Noah had given Holloway the second cot, leaving himself the floor near the fire. Avery had insisted on keeping her position, and Ghost had resumed his place at her side. The fire crackled and popped. Outside, the wind continued its assault. But inside, something had changed. Holloway's revelation had cracked open something Noah had kept sealed for 3 years. The secret was out. The worst thing about him was now known by 2 strangers who had no reason to care about him. And yet, they were still here, still looking at him the same way, still trusting him to keep them alive. "Tell us," Avery said softly from her cot. "Not because we need to know, but because you need to say it." Noah stared into the flames. Ghost came to lie beside him, that familiar weight a comfort he had not known he needed. And slowly, haltingly, he began to speak. The mission was supposed to be simple. Intel said a weapons smuggling ring was operating out of a research station in the Arctic. 6 of us went in: Davis, Chen, Rodriguez, Ghost, and me. His voice was flat, clinical, the way he had been trained to give mission reports. But underneath the words, Avery could hear the tremor he was trying to hide. The intel was wrong. It was not a smuggling ring. It was a trap. They knew we were coming, had known for days. He paused, his hand finding Ghost's fur. The dog pressed closer. We were pinned down for 8 hours, running low on ammunition, no extraction available. Enemy closing in from 3 sides. I had to make a choice. Try to fight through to the north, where the intel said there was a possible escape route, or go south into unknown territory. I chose north. The fire crackled. Holloway was silent on his cot, listening. The north route was mined. Davis hit the first one. Chen tried to help him and triggered the second. Rodriguez was providing cover fire and took a round to the chest. Noah's voice finally cracked. Ghost made it through. I made it through. But not them. Not Davis with his wife and new baby. Not Chen, who was 2 weeks from retirement. Not Rodriguez, who had just gotten engaged. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Avery spoke, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. That was not your fault. I made the call. I chose the route. It was my responsibility. The intel was wrong. The mission was compromised. You made the best decision you could with the information you had. Noah shook his head. You do not understand. I understand exactly. Avery pushed herself up, her face fierce. I chose the route that day too. I looked at the mountain, assessed the conditions, and made a call. The avalanche killed my best friend. Does that make me a murderer? That is different. How? How is it different? We were both leading people who trusted us. We both made decisions that seemed right at the time. We both lost people we loved. She leaned forward, holding his gaze. The only difference is that you have been punishing yourself for 3 years, and I have been trying to get justice. Noah stared at her. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever cut through his guilt so directly, so unflinchingly. You carry ghosts, Avery said, echoing his words from the night before. So do I. But ghosts are not meant to be chains. They are meant to be witnesses. They watch us to see what we will do with the life they cannot live. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Ghost's tail thumped against the floor. And from his cot, Holloway spoke. She is right, Pierce. I have read every report from that mission. You made the only call that had any chance of success. The south route was worse. If you had gone south, none of you would have made it out. Noah's head snapped toward him. What? Holloway nodded. The after-action analysis confirmed it. The enemy had their main force positioned to the south. You chose the route with mines because the alternative was certain death for everyone. But the report said what politics demanded it say. But the truth is in the details, if you know where to look. You saved 2 lives that night, Pierce. Yours and Ghost's. In that situation, that is a victory. Noah sat very still. 3 years of guilt, 3 years of self-punishment, 3 years of believing he had killed his men through incompetence. And now this. He did not know how to process it, did not know how to let go of the weight he had been carrying for so long that it had become part of him. But Ghost licked his hand, and Avery held his gaze. And somewhere in the howling darkness of the storm, something that had been frozen for a very long time began to thaw. Morning of the 3rd day brought silence. Noah woke from the first real sleep he had gotten in years to find the world transformed. The wind had stopped. The snow had stopped. Through the frost-covered window, sunlight painted the white landscape in shades of gold and pink. Ghost was already at the door, tail wagging. Avery was awake on her cot, watching the sunrise with tears streaming down her face. Holloway was sitting up, his color better, his shoulder stabilized. We made it, Avery whispered. Noah moved to the window. The snow was deep, 4 feet or more, but the sky was clear. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of a helicopter. They would be rescued today. Avery would miss her court date, but there would be other dates, other chances. Holloway would recover. And Noah did not know what came next for him. But for the first time in 3 years, he wanted to find out. The helicopter arrived within hours. Lena Brooks, rescue pilot, sat down in the clearing with precision that spoke to years of experience. 3 survivors, she said into her radio. 1 mobility impaired, 1 shoulder injury, 1 stubborn former SEAL who refuses to admit he needs rest. I am fine, Noah said. You have been awake for 3 days, and you are bleeding from a head wound you apparently forgot to mention. You are not fine. But he was. For the first time in years, Noah Pierce was something approaching fine. The flight to the hospital took 40 minutes. Avery sat beside Noah, Ghost wedged between them, her hand finding his as the helicopter lifted off. Thank you, she said, for everything. "The court case," he said. "When is the new date?" "3 weeks. They granted an extension because of the storm. I will be there, as a witness to the conditions that night." The company cannot claim negligence when a trained rescue operator confirms the weather was unsurvivable. Avery's eyes widened. "You would do that? Ghost seems to think you are worth helping. I have learned to trust his judgment." Ghost's tail thumped against the helicopter floor. Avery laughed, the first real laugh Noah had heard from her. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the greatest miracles do not come with thunder. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the middle of a storm, carried by a stranger and a dog who refused to give up. 6 months later, the lawsuit settled. The tour company accepted responsibility, paid damages to Jenna's family, and implemented new safety protocols that would save lives for years to come. Avery stood on the courthouse steps, allowing herself to cry for the first time since the avalanche. Beside her, Noah stood with Ghost. "She did it, Jenna," Avery whispered to the sky. "We did it." Noah's hand found hers. They had not defined what they were to each other. Did not need to. Some bonds transcended labels. That evening, they stood outside Noah's cabin, watching the first snow of the season fall gently on the Wyoming mountains. Ghost bounded through the fresh powder. Avery pulled out the red gloves, the ones Jenna had given her. She placed one glove on the porch railing, a memorial to a friend who would never be forgotten. She kept the other one. Noah watched her, understanding without needing explanation. He thought of Davis, Chen, Rodriguez, thought of the way he had finally visited their graves last month. He was not healed. Neither was Avery. But they were healing. And there was a difference. Ghost came bounding back, snow covering his muzzle. He barked once, imperious and demanding. "I think he wants to go for a walk," Avery said. Noah held out his hand. "Ride with me," he said. Avery took his hand, always. And together, with Ghost leading the way, they walked into the gentle snow, not running from their ghosts, walking with them.